Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am here taking an extra moment to ground myself and to establish myself in presence and in heart with my friend Sarah, who consented to be part of this rubber chicken experiment with me, of exploring together the subject of healing despair and resignation. I am once again feeling for the feeling of connecting to my root with Sarah here and connecting to my heart and creating a kind of campfire for Sarah and I to speak around about healing despair and resignation. And it's an invitation for anybody who wishes to join the campfire in the quality of heart, of love, of mercy, and of holiness. So welcome those who are resonant with this campfire. Yeah. Why I care very much about considering the question of healing despair and resignation, why I'm teaching a class on it. When is that? Weekend after next? I wish I could remember exactly. Why I care about teaching about this is that I think that there are a lot of people who have despair and resignation, sometimes overtly, like they know. We know when we're hitting that. Sometimes unconsciously. And it might have been conscious for a moment or longer than a moment, but at a certain point, the soldier came out and they just stuffed it down and said, I must soldier on. And can almost forget that there's something in there that's like clunk, that's stuck. Because the thing about despair and resignation is that it seems like it's an emotion, a very difficult emotion, but it's actually not an emotion. It's a state, it's a thought, it's a parking space you can't get out of. And there's probably a lot of emotion under it. And what I've been finding is that there tends to be two reasons for despair and resignation. One is more emotion than we know how to work with, or more difficult emotion than we know how to work with. We're under-resourced. We're under-supported. It's too big. It's unwieldy, and we don't know what to do with it. In which case, despair and resignation are actually a great alternative to bleeding to death. It's like a good, it's not, I'm not going to call it exactly a good holding pattern, but it's a survival pattern. It's like, okay, I can go on. I don't believe in anything, but I'm doing this. So that's one of the reasons for it, in which case we need to simultaneously be supporting people in finding resource for working with strong emotion. Both Chinese medicine and Sufi healing have a lot of resources for this. And working with unblocking, freeing, because just one or the other is not that helpful. You can work on opening the chi and creating movement, but if the person still feels like they're falling down a mine shaft and is unsupported, it's that freedom is actually not helpful, and they may redouble in their efforts to shut down. On the other hand, if somebody's in despair and resignation and we just give them the support that they need, they may not take it in, and they may not feel able to move with it because of the despair and resignation pattern. Like a plant that gets root bound, there may be a like simultaneous supporting and practices for opening that are both needed. That's why I want to talk about it, because maybe this pandemic is ending soon, maybe. Maybe maybe it's springtime, maybe. It's going to be a snowstorm tomorrow where I live. So maybe it's spring, maybe but it's a time when looking at how we get out of entrenched, stuck patterns that may be holding us in a survival way, and how we can open that into, okay, spring is when all that stuff that froze starts to unfreeze. How do we do this well? How do we use the time, the moment, almost as matching funds? So that's why I'm wanting to talk about this and workshop about this. Sarah, why do you want to talk about this and be part of this?
I personally have been through despair and resignation, and I'm always amazed and grateful at paths that lead out of it. And I want to, on a me first basis, be a vessel that is holding hope and promoting heart space and hope for me first, and then rippling outwards.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. While you were speaking, I realized that I spoke of the two reasons for despair and resignation, but I only actually spoke about one of them, which is the unsupportedness underneath. Another is habit. Another's habit. That sometimes a person really is ready to get out of this tight, like they're ready to shed and able to move on, but they've been in this thing for long enough that it feels like a second skin, and it is too tight, but it's just like, this is how it goes. Yeah. So you moved through it. That's great. It got the support. Good. We can give the support, but what about the folks who are just like, this is the habit? And often the way that habit looks is that there's a feeling of justification. Beware of justification. I think we can, I'm thinking about some of them. Sarah, you can think about some of them. All those others gathering at this campfire can think about that feeling of justification for despair, for resignation, for various forms of illness. There's the urge to justify, and the clinging to the justification can become like the furniture and the wallpaper where you live. And we don't even see it anymore, but it's familiar and it makes sense. Every single illness is justified. This happened, that happened, that happened. All of the despair and resignation, there's always a reason, and it's reasonable. Healing, on the other hand, is a wild-ass irrational journey. It's a pattern break. It's a revolution right in the face of all this justification. It's like it all came down like dominoes. Your father did this, then you did that, then you went to there, and now you're a mess. Totally justified. I'm not being sarcastic. Illness is always justified. And despair and resignation, you can create PhD level justifications, and it's true. Healing is nuts. Healing is a movement that is irrational and irrational and takes us out of it. logic. Healing's not logical. Despair and resignation are often very logical. They're a limited logic that doesn't see the other options, but it always makes a lot of sense. I'm wanting to be saying this very respectfully because I've been there and I mean it and I get it and I understand it. It does make sense. It is justified. Which is what I mean about the habit. Because given how sensible it is to be ill and to be in despair and resignation, it can be hard to break the habit of being so sensible and justified and right. You know, being right is great. And we're going to move out of justification, out of the justified and being right into something that's like, what is this? Some other thing. Really? Healing? The uncharted territory? I say this is one of the most important aspects of healing despair and resignation is validating the justification, validating the being right, and moving from there into, yes, justified. If you want to stay miserable for the rest of your life, no one will think you're stupid. Healing's always a crazy quantum shift into something new. Do we want to give that a go? Do we, without a plan, because even before the plan, right? Because plans are logical and healing is not. We're wanting to shift out of the non-healing state of justification into the realm of, I don't know. But even if I'm justified and even if I'm right, I'm not as interested in that as in where can we go from here? Is this making sense? How's this resonating? Any thoughts, questions, or reflections?
My question is, if one suspects that one is in resignation and, you know, wanting to break that habit or pattern, what are your suggestions for getting started?
So many. So again, part of what we're looking at here is it's a two-part move. It's kind of like getting out of the overly tight parking space. It's like both parts of it. One is the practices around support for having emotions, possibly very strong ones. And the other is pattern breakers. Where do I want to start in speaking about this? I think I want to talk a little bit about pattern breakers. One of the things I'm going to be teaching on the Healing Despair and Resignation workshop is physical movement-based things. Like, for instance, let's do this. Put your hands in front of you like you're holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I learned this from Thomas Merrill. Actually, it's two trays, and go ahead and put your hands out to the side, but straight, like the arms are out like this, because otherwise those hors d'oeuvres are going to be all over the floor, right? They need to be kind of flat, but straight out to the side. For a lot of people, that's very difficult position. It's actually an anatomically neutral position, which means that if you're feeling tightness and strain here, you've got some stasis in a very important place in your body for despair and resignation. So hands out to the side, holding those two hors d'oeuvre trays, bounce your shoulders a couple of times to get that area loosened up, get it freed up a little bit. Yeah. And then leave your shoulders in exactly the position that they're in. And drop those hors d'oeuvres all over the floor. I notice a very different feeling in my chest. When lung 1, lung 2 are shut, and they can get shut really easily. Let's go into it again. Like, just pretend you're texting. All you have to do is just text a little bit, and then you can get into this habit of these gates closed, which create an immediate discouragement. Okay, put that tray of hors d'oeuvres in front of you again. Okay, it's 2 trays. Put them out to the side. Like, yeah. Holding those 2 trays of hors d'oeuvres out to the side. Bounce it, your shoulders a little bit. Like, hey, the drop is really good. Like, free it. Oh, it's a habit. It's a pattern. It's got nothing to do with us anymore. Shoulders staying exactly where they are. It's very simple. Drop the hors d'oeuvres. Yeah. Notice your outlook. It's very much harder to be in despair and resignation when this area of your body, in some yoga traditions, are called the nodes of joy, when they're wedged shut by habit, just by habit. While here in this position with these gates more open than they usually are, see if you can feel your sternum. Most people's sternum is a little bit tilted and compressed inwards, which also creates a lot of patterned, just habitual despair and resignation. See if you can feel a beam of light coming from your sternum straight out to the horizon as your shoulders stay in that neutral position that most of us don't spend much time in. Beam of light coming out to the horizon, and try lifting that beam just a few degrees up over the horizon. Just like feel that beam lifting up. I'd lift it even a tiny bit more. Yeah. When these gates are open, when the when the sternum has been returned to its natural tilt and is not like in like this, which it gets stuck in there, and then you're just like nothing's gonna work, you know. Do your hors d'oeuvre tray thing. Reopen it. Reset the sternum by lifting the beam a little bit, and then take a look at the same situation. It may be terrifying. It may be difficult. Excuse me. It may be unjust. It may be painful. But because our sternum is in its proper position and our gates of joy are open, we are able to be in that situation with a lot more hope and possibility. What you noticing, Sarah? How's this going?
It feels good. I think this is very useful.
Now, the weird thing about it is, folks who are listening to this, but who are not actually giving it a try along with us, I bet it sounds really like you're going to solve the world's problems with that. You're going to solve my problems with that. It really seems sort of ridiculous. And so I'm going to invite you to put down what it is that you're doing just for a sec. It's a really short exercise, and try it again with us, holding the hors d'oeuvre tray in front of you. Putting them out to the side. If you're feeling that drawing, that tightness across the front of your chest, you really need this exercise. This should be anatomically neutral. You should feel no tension at all. If you are feeling tension there, you have some anatomically based despair and resignation that may be influencing your decision-making in life without you even knowing it. Bounce a few times, bounce hard, like lift it and let it fall. Wiggle it a little and bounce it again, let it know, hey, 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 because it can take a little bit of force to let it go. All right, and with your shoulders in that place, is it completely open? Probably not, but more open. Let your shoulders remain where they are and drop the hors d'oeuvre trays. Yes. Notice the difference of outlook. Beam of light coming from the sternum straight out to the horizon. I like doing this with you, Sarah. I can feel us both like I feel like a couple of superheroes, like sending the beam out to the horizon. Exactly. Yeah, you guys can join us. The beam out to the horizon. And then lift the beam a little bit. Possibly a little bit more. If it's very tucked in, you need to, more than 2 degrees. It might be 3 or 4. Or even, yeah, there we go. We just hit it. Yeah, it might be a whole 5 degrees up there. Yeah, exactly. There are so many, I'm not going to call them tricks. I'm going to call them pattern breaks, anatomical pattern breaks that help us realize where we've gotten ourselves into a mood that self-justifies quite easily. That needs to be reopened in order to be able to even get the resources in to say, okay, are you in pain about some things? Are you grieving about some things? It is spring coming. I'm pretty sure of that. And I'm noticing that this autumn, I spent a lot of time talking about anger and the balance of autumn, which is usually associated with grief and anger. Now it's spring, and I really feel like I want to be talking about grief. It's a funny thing. It just feels apropos when I speak to people, and when we work with this opening and we work with the kinds of frustrations on the inside that don't have enough breathing room. There's a kind of, don't imitate me, but like everything feels like anger plus incredible stuckness, despair and resignation. You can't get there from here. There needs to be breathing space, physically, anatomically, for anything to be able to move. This is before thinking about it. It's going to be terrible thinking if there's no breathing space. And grief creates emotional breathing space. It's a very tender subject, especially if what people are feeling on the surface is frustration and anger and really wishing things are other than they are. And that, like, well, do something. The thing about grief is that good grief, no, not a Charlie Brown joke, but good grief, healthy grief, the goal of healthy grief has an inner and outer aspect. The inner aspect is you know what your values are. You're really clear. In the light of this loss, I now know that I love and value, fill in the blank, that I love and value it so much that even in its absence, I am not letting go of that value. It's not convenience based. This is my value system and I really mean it. That's the inner goal of healthy grief, is to get really, really clear. I live by this even when it's very inconvenient. These are my values. And the outer goal of grief is to come to an acceptance of how it actually is. Acceptance not meaning this is the way it will always be, or I'm going to leave it like that, but acceptance that right now the house is a mess and there's stuff all over the floor. I may then start picking things up, but the reason for first grieving, if we have a strong value that the house not be like this, but it is, the value of grieving is to reach the ground of acceptance and come out of the stratospheric state of should. It should be this way, and this should have happened, and it should be this, and it shouldn't be that, and it's very, it's up here. Grief, grief, well done, acknowledges, I don't like it, but it is like that. And this is this very downward coming back to the ground, hopefully with a lot of love, a lot of heart, a lot of support, so that it's not like, you know, skydiving without a parachute. It's like, until we actually are what I'm going to call emotionally at ground level. Able to be there with it, whatever it is, not fighting it, not shooting at it, not thrashing. Right? There's the Chinese, one of the Chinese words for grief, bei, shows violent negation over the heart. And it's that state of no. Yes. And grief is that process. Good grief, healthy grief is that process of coming down to the ground, standing there and saying, it is that way. I accept that it is. Not like the should phase, it's of no use. That was just a way to try to keep from hitting the ground. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to say it shouldn't be this way. You might be able to feel inside why I call this emotional breathing space. Grief creates emotional breathing space. We are on the ground. We are at ground level with the reality of the situation rather than trying to make it be like it is. It is. And in that greater spaciousness, I'm speaking now about the rib cage and the physical stuff that we will work with, but also emotionally. Okay. From here, with our value system inside of us and our situation, which we have accepted, like we're starting here. This is the starting line. What now? there's a creative openness there that is tentative. It is tender. It is as tentative and tender as new spring leaves. And we're moving with that, supporting that slowly and gently, just getting used to it. When a person's coming out of despair and resignation, it's a very tender state, especially if we don't have the shield of a plan. I'm going forth with a plan. It's like, I'm not going forth with a plan. I'm staying right here with some breathing space. And maybe even feeling some more layers of grief as we gain courage to come out of the fight that was underneath the despair and resignation, seeking enough support to just be here with what is. Now, I've been talking long enough that I have completely lost track of syntax and don't even know if I'm at the end of a sentence or not. But I'm at the end of that breath cycle, that's for sure. And feeling here with you the feeling of things that have been held, starting to give up the fight and just come to ground level. Yeah. How's this going, Sarah? Any comments or questions around this?
This is making sense to me, and I can feel in my own experience the tendency to hold on to what I want, and
yeah, I won't go down.
The benefit of being on the ground of reality and processing the loss, the very real loss that's there, in order to take the next steps with what's, given what has happened, what's next.
There's a lot more to say, both on the physical level and on the strategic level of the most popular non-healing states, the most popular ways of solidifying into despair and resignation. I'm feeling really good about just this space that we're in, though. And I'm kind of feeling like it might be worth ending here with this feeling. We could, do the because this open space makes it so that we can imagine much more easily that if we let ourselves actually go down to ground level, the sun will rise, something will rise, we don't know what. I think I'll leave it at that, unless there's anything more, Sarah, that you want to contribute.
This has been a blessing for me to participate in. Thank you.
All right. Thank everyone for the quality of the space that we are creating here. It's no small thing to be in the psychic public and create something like this together, a place of peace, a place of landing. So thank you all. And on my website is the Healing Despair and Resignation workshop. It'll feel kind of like this, going through stuff that might apply to us, might apply to our dear ones, might apply to our clients, and feeling our way through it with a number of different techniques, skills, and patterns. All right. Thank you. See you around.